That was it. Live, raw, and unfiltered. It appears that China spy balloon has now been shot down over the Atlantic Ocean. You are taking a live look here, live, raw, and unfiltered, as that balloon appears to be heading downward after it has been shot down.
On February 4th, 2023, an F-22 flying at 58,000 feet shot down a balloon that had spent a week floating suspiciously over the continental U.S. After days of speculation and intrigue, authorities confirmed that the Chinese balloon was indeed equipped with surveillance technology. It was not the innocent weather balloon that China claimed it to be. This was espionage, plain and simple, and as it turns out, there was really nothing new about it. From the French Revolutionary Wars in the 18th century to the hundreds of balloons launched by the U.S. during the Cold War, the history of using balloons to spy on other nations goes way back. Today, even with satellites, drones, and state-of-the-art stealth jets, the balloon remains a crucial military tool. In this video, we'll talk about the surprising history of spy balloons and how these whimsical-looking objects have proven their worth as weapons time and time again. The very first spy balloons. The first time a balloon was used for surveillance was during the Battle of Fleurus, fought on the Belgian border in 1792 during the wars that racked Europe following the French Revolution. The French outnumbered their Dutch and Austrian enemies in the battle, but the balloon gave them something extra, a clear view of enemy troops. These early balloons were tethered to the ground by cables but could reach hundreds of feet into the air. From the balloon's highest point, a man with a telescope could see clearly for several miles. Whoever was riding in the balloon's basket would report what they saw by placing messages in a bag, which they would slide down a rope to the soldiers on the ground. This gave the French a decisive advantage, which helped them win the battle. But some people saw balloons as unfair and ungentlemanly. Back then, armies were expected to follow strict rules of engagement, and the Dutch and Austrians, the losers of that battle, complained that France's balloon went against that time-honored code of conduct. Napoleon himself closed down France's balloon school after declaring himself emperor in 1804, and it wasn't until well into the 19th century that French spy balloons regained their place as a part of war. Why you might not want to be a balloonist. 70 years after the Battle of Fleurus, across the Atlantic, balloon technology hadn't changed much when the Union and Confederate armies used them during the American Civil War. These balloons were larger and could float higher than their predecessors, but they were still used in much the same way and had to be tied down to prevent them from floating off. Despite the precautions, accidents still happen. On one memorable occasion, a Union general who was fond of ballooning went up on his own. Instead of using 3 to 4 ropes as he had been instructed, he used only one. That mistake nearly cost him his life. While floating up in the air above the Union and Confederate lines, the single rope tethering him to the ground suddenly snapped, with the sound of a pistol, and the poor general could do nothing as he floated helplessly over to the Confederate side. The enemy took some shots at him, but he eventually floated back unharmed and dutifully sketched out everything he had seen. There's no doubt that this kind of surveillance was highly valuable, but that value also made balloonists a target. During World War I, balloons took on enormous proportions and were used frequently by both sides. Some of these observation balloons were 600 to 700 feet in length and could reach thousands of feet in altitude. Since they still used highly flammable hydrogen gas, armies took great pains to protect their balloons, placing them well behind their lines and surrounding them with anti-aircraft guns and aircraft. But despite the heavy protection, balloonists were in constant danger of having their balloons destroyed by enemy planes. Balloon busters were fighter pilots who deliberately went after observation balloons. These kinds of missions were thought to be suicide, but many succeeded. One American fighter pilot shot down 3 observation balloons in one day before being shot down himself. If a fighter plane did succeed in hitting a balloon, the man in the basket would be forced to jump out using a parachute. Sometimes the fighting was so fierce that balloonists had to make multiple jumps a day, each time returning to the skies to continue their intelligence gathering. World War II and the Japanese fire balloon debacle. But balloons have been used for more than just spying. In fact, balloons were responsible for the only American civilian casualties suffered during World War II. The tragedy happened in one of the most unlikely of places, a small town in rural Oregon. On the Sunday of May 5, 1945, Elsie Mitchell, who was pregnant, was taking a group of Sunday school kids out for a picnic. While her husband Archie parked the car, Elsie and the kids came across an odd-looking balloon lying at the edge of the woods. Archie took notice as the kids approached the balloon and shouted at them to be careful. But in the next instant, the balloon exploded, killing everyone except for Archie. The balloon bomb that exploded in Oregon was just one of 9,000 that Japan sent over to the western United States during the final year of World War II. It was an enormous undertaking that required applying the most advanced research of the time. In order to make it across the vast Pacific Ocean, each balloon was designed to automatically drop sandbags whenever it got too low, allowing it to traverse the thousands of miles necessary to make the entire journey. Despite the operation's sophistication, however, it was considered a failure. The idea had been to use the balloon bombs to set off conflagrations throughout the vast forests of the American West, hopefully causing panic. But for all their ingenuity, the Japanese made a serious miscalculation. The balloons arrived during the rainy season, which meant most of them failed to ignite at all. This often overlooked part of World War II could have had a much bigger impact, but as it turns out, few people learned about the balloons. Just a few months after the tragic deaths of the Sunday school group in Oregon, news of Japan's balloon bombs soon got lost among all of the other dizzying headlines of the war's final days. Spy planes, secret gadgets, and balloons. When we think about Cold War espionage, we often think about secret agents with high-tech gadgets, or U-2 spy planes, which were capable of taking pictures from miles above their targets. But the United States also used spy balloons. In fact, throughout the course of the conflict, the United States sent hundreds of balloons over the vast Soviet territory, each one equipped with a 150-pound refrigerator-sized camera. In the end, only about 10% of these spy balloons completed their mission. Put another way, the US government only recovered the footage from about 45 of the over 500 that were launched. What happened to the rest? Well, a large number of them were shot down by Soviet fighters, while others veered off course. Still, others were never recovered due to the complex aerial maneuvering that was necessary to collect the footage. You see, once the balloons had crossed over all of Russia, they floated out to the Pacific Ocean, where C-119 cargo planes had to hook them with a grappling device before they fell into the sea. Sometimes things went awry during the interception, and crucial footage was lost in the ocean. Still, the balloons that did return with their footage intact revealed some important information. The photos covered about 8% of Russia's landmass by one estimate. They also announced that the Soviets were building a large nuclear refinery in Siberia. Understandably, the balloons pissed off the Soviet leadership, and they repeatedly demanded that the US end the program. Of course, the US claimed that the balloons were conducting meteorological research. It would not be the last time a nation would make that excuse. Spy balloons and modern warfare. Now you might be wondering why advanced militaries like the US would use balloons when satellites can take pictures from space. Well, for one thing, to launch a satellite into space, you need launching equipment, which can cost upwards of hundreds of millions of dollars. Aside from the cost, balloons travel more slowly than satellites, an advantage when you're trying to get a thorough image of a particular area. Finally, spy balloons can pose as civilian balloons. Just as the United States tried to convince the Soviet Union that the hundreds of balloons floating over their territory were conducting meteorological research, China claimed the same in February. It turns out the history of countries pretending like their balloons aren't not spying is almost as long as the history of spy balloons itself. For all of those reasons, balloons continue to be used by militaries around the world. In Afghanistan, the US deployed balloons in villages all across the country. These giant observation balloons provided constant visual coverage of essential roads and helped deter ambushes. On the other hand, their continuous presence also unnerved residents, who felt like they couldn't escape the watchful gaze of the Americans. From the 18th and 19th centuries, when they hovered just above enemy troops, to today's ultra-resistant balloons capable of crossing oceans, spy balloons have played an important role in military operations.